Good morning, everybody. Give a few minutes here as more folks are coming in. All right, thanks for joining us all today. Today we're going to be talking about practice implementation, specifically cover crops and livestock integration. We have a really great speaker today, Philip Frank from Lifetime Ag. He works out in the Fruita area here in Western Colorado. And I've had the privilege of being able to go out there and see some of their field tours. And if you ever get a chance, that is something to see. They really are on to, they've really figured out how to do this. So Philip's going to talk to us today and give us an overview of what they're doing out there and talk to us a little bit about their company as well. So Philip, why don't you go ahead and take it away, sir?
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for coming on and listening. I hope I can share some things that are helpful. I know that my understanding is most of you guys will be taking this information and going back to farmers to talk to them and help them. So I tried to kind of keep that in mind as I designed this. So hopefully that works out. So first off, let me give a little bit of an introduction as far as what I do. So yeah, I work with Lowell King. Some of you have heard of him, some not. But like you said, we farm Fruita, Grand Junction area. And we farm between us, we farm around 900 acres between all of us. And we're primarily, our main cash crop is high quality alfalfa and grass hay for the horse market. Everywhere from guys buying 1 or 2 bales to guys that are buying semi-loads for breeding facilities, training facilities, all that kind of thing. So that's our main cash crop. But then when we rotate out of alfalfa and grass hay, we're 100% no-till. We use cover crops and other cash crops like corn, wheat, other small grains. We do have seed business as well. So we grow quite a bit of cereal rye, triticale, that kind of thing for seed as well. So when we are outside of that horse hay market and we're growing other cash crops, we work really hard to push cover crops as much as possible. We're 100% no-till, like I said. And we do also run about 250 head of mother cows that some are up in the high country over the summer and then come down and graze our fields, our crop residues and cover crops, that kind of thing over winter. So grazing is a huge part of our deal. And like I say, we're dedicated to being no-till and using cover crops to do our tillage. So we started this about, it would be about 8 years ago now, and we got started with basically we were 100% conventional. This area of Colorado is very conventional in that when we were moldboard plows and 8 tillage passes to plant a crop and that kind of thing. And so as time went on, we realized what other options there were, and we started looking into it, and we bought our first no-till drill in 2016, I believe it was, and continued to go from there. And there have been plenty of challenges and everything. We are almost 100% furrow irrigated as well. That's a difference from a lot of you in other parts of the country, I would imagine, or excuse me, parts of the state, I would imagine. We do have a few center pivots and that kind of thing, but we are largely 99% furrow irrigated here as well. So with that, we'll kind of get into it. So if I can get my screen to work here, just a second. John, we may have a problem here. There we go. All right, we're off. Okay, so if we're going to talk about cover crops, the first thing we'd be remiss to not actually talk about our soil health principles. So I'm sure John's talked about them before, so we'll go through them kind of briefly. But it's just whenever I talk to farmers, this is what I always go back to when we're talking to them, because if you follow these principles, it's amazing how if you have any kind of problem as you're going through your farming year, and you're in this system, generally you can trace it back to something related to one of these principles. So it really is a guiding force for us. So the first one is to know your context, which is basically kind of what I was just telling you about our operation. What's your rotation? What are your limitations? So furrow irrigation is a huge limitation for us. What are you growing? What's your climate? Those kind of things. Because once you take that, then you apply that to the next 5, and it shapes how you use those principles in your operation. So Number two would be to provide cover for your soil. And just simply, I mean, look in this picture here. We're planting into residue there. We're always keeping residue on our soil, keeping our soil temperature from having those huge variations. For instance, this morning it was 12 degrees, the first hard freeze we've had, and that looks a lot different with some cover versus bare soil. So number three, minimize soil disturbance. Notice it says minimize, not eliminate. Ideally, we would eliminate all soil disturbance. We wouldn't spray, no chemicals, no synthetics, but on our farms, we do use some synthetic fertilizers. We do use some chemicals. And honestly, a no-till drill is a form of disturbance. Furrow irrigating, so we have to run a creaser to clean our furrows. That is a form of disturbance. So minimize, not eliminate. The last three are the ones that we're really going to focus on today. So I'll just jump through them and then break them out more later. So introduce diversity. Keep living roots in the soil at all times, and integrate livestock. Okay, so what does plant diversity mean? Well, if you look at all these pictures, there's multiple species in all of these pictures. Some of them you can't tell, like the bottom, the side row sprinkler there, you can't tell, but there's soybeans down in there and all that kind of thing. So essentially, when you think about our cash crops, most of the time we're growing a monoculture species. We're growing corn or wheat or soybeans or whatever. And so in that scenario, we're pretty limited, but outside of that, once we're out of that cash crop, the options are wide open to add as much different kind of roots, different kind of biology, different kind of life into our soil. And so anytime we possibly can, we add in diversity. So you look around these pictures, this the brassica here, this collards, has a deep taproot. You've got your sunflowers that are a broadleaf. Your legumes, you've got hairy vetch and peas and those kind of things that are fixing more nitrogen. And then grasses, anything from small grains to perennials to this would be sorghum, sudan, millet, and that kind of thing. The more you can pack those all into a mix, the more you're essentially packing that many different crop rotations into one, rather than conventional system where you grow one root type a year. You have one type of root exodus. You're feeding one type of biology, and everything else is just hung out to dry. So okay, this is the one that really and truly this is one that you really got to focus on when you're talking to farmers, because they just flat out don't understand how critical this is. When I say keep living roots in the soil, I mean all the time, as much as possible. And a lot of farmers get to this time of year right now, like we're going to be combining corn here this afternoon, and they think, well, it's what, today's the 30th, it's November, you can't grow anything now, so it's just, that's all you can do. Well, we're following the combine with the drill. We're planting cover crops, like in this top left, that's cereal rye planted into a warm season cover crop. It was planted about this time of year, and it doesn't look like it's doing much there. It's only 1.5 inches tall. But look at the next picture. This is a different field, but same scenario. 1.5 inches above ground, and those roots go as deep as a shovel goes underground. That's feeding your biology. And like this right now, yeah, it froze this morning. It's 12 degrees. Now it's 39 degrees. Our soil temperature, I guarantee, never got down below 34. Anytime the soil temperature is above 34 degrees, cereal rye can grow. Anytime it can grow, it's taking solar energy and it's putting it into your soil and it's feeding your biology. So anytime you have something growing, it's money in the bank. And that's what farmers just a lot of times tend to not realize is, now, are we growing a cash crop here? Not necessarily, but we are growing something that will put money in the bank for us. And then the picture on the right is just another example of good, healthy roots in your soil, what it does for you. And the last is integrate livestock. Now, aside from the obvious, I mean, like I said, we run cattle, so there's an absolute need to feed cows every single day they eat, whether it's rainy or sunny or snowy or what. So aside from that, though, we're also feeding the biology underground again. If you look at all these little holes in this cow pie, or if you look at these little black beetles, move these little black beetles here, those are dung beetles that are taking everything in those cow pies and storing it underground in little packages that earthworms and other biology can utilize, as well as this cow here, when she grazes with her tongue and rips that matter there, the saliva is interacting with the biology in the plants, and we're feeding our soil. So we're taking all this and we're putting it back in the soil. So when you're talking to farmers, I'd say there's an obvious. Oftentimes there will be farmers that want to do this, whatever, want to grow cover crops, aren't sure where to start, aren't sure what questions to ask, and so it's pretty simple, really and truly, to get started with it. And there's a few questions. I mean, first off, what are they growing? When are they going to harvest it? What are they going to plant next? And then essentially you design cover crops that can fit into that space. And so that's what we look at every single year is, okay, what are we, like right now we're combining corn, and so here we are in November. What can we plant in that window that will fit in with our rotation next year? Some of that we're actually planting small grains that'll be combined. And so it actually is the cash crop that we're drilling right now into soil moisture. We don't have irrigation water for more than another week, but we've got soil moisture. So in that scenario, that's what's going to be next in our rotation. In other scenarios, we're planting a cover crop in preparation for corn. So farmers have to be thinking ahead of that, because when it comes down to time to actually harvest, uh, it's time to plant as well. If it's time to harvest, it's time to plant. So, but most importantly, they need to be thinking about what are your goals. A cover crop is great, but a cover crop misplanned or mismanaged will cost you money. A cover crop that is managed to to fulfill your goals will make you money. So there's a lot of different ways it can go. And it's funny because this is one of those things. I mean, we definitely have goals in mind for our cover crops still. I mean, like I said, we're feeding cattle, and so grazing is a huge part of it. But once you understand how to make different cover crops work, um, planting something is just money in the bank. You have to have something growing at all times for this to work. So, but for the sake of getting farmers started, there has to be some understanding of where they're going with it, what they're doing. So whether it's, making extra hay, actually more double crop, making extra cutting of hay after your wheat harvest, or uh, grazing like this here on the top left, that's cereal rye, that would of course provide early spring grazing as well as weed suppression because of how aggressive it comes. This top right is really, or excuse me, bottom right and the top right are both really great for nutrient cycling because there's lots of different species. There's buckwheat, that kind of thing. So it just depends what your goals are. I mean, those are kind of the first questions to ask. And then, so now we'll kind of get into just talking about what to plant, when to plant, that kind of thing. So it seems um, logical that you'd start in the spring talking about different species if we're going to go through the whole year for different times of year what we'd plant, but it's not. It's not. If you are a regenerative no-till farmer, your spring starts now. It's springtime. I mean, you have to plan ahead. So, for instance, like I said, right now we're going to be combining corn. We're planting cover crops that will germinate next spring. Right now, it's not the time. It's not the time to shut down and ignore the season. It's the time to get planting. So, and when I say that, I mean we truly. One of the keys on our farm is that when we combine or when we harvest whatever we're harvesting, whether it's making the last cutting of hay or whatever, if we're going to be planting a cover crop, we are in there within 3 days after we harvest. And a lot of people say, well, how do you do that? How can you? We're too busy. I mean, I see it all the time. People are too busy uh, combining wheat or harvesting sweet corn or whatever, and the no-till drill sets for 6 weeks sometimes before they get planted. And the bottom line is we if we have to bring in extra help, if we have to run at night, we plan to just get there and get it done. So, and it pays us dividends. For example, this on the top left, excuse me, bottom left, I got my directions backwards today, but this is an example of a customer that this was corn that he combined. This picture was taken like December 10th, I think, and you can't see it, but the combine's over on the left side running as well. We're in the field the same time he's combining. So he's combining 230 bushel corn there, and then we drilled right through the residue. Didn't do anything with the residue. Drilled right into it with our drill and planted cereal rye, and that was December 10th, which there again feels too late for people. But because we were right there, if we had combined and finished everything and whatever and had a cup of coffee, and pretty soon it would have been January. Well, it was too late. We didn't. Well, instead we got right out after it, planted that winter while the ground was frozen. We grazed the corn residue with our cattle. The rye comes up, acts as a cover crop, keeps a living root in the soil. It didn't do a lot over winter, but there was enough 34 to 35 degree days, in the soil that it could germinate and get started. And by spring, it was there. So we were feeding that biology. So when I say September 1st until the ground freezes, that's going to vary. I know we've got people all over the state here, so higher elevations, that's going to look different, maybe August 1st. But the point is that basically, let's say from August 1st on, you're thinking about next spring if you're really doing this right. So cereal rye, just getting into species, cereal rye is really one that I'm going to talk about a lot, just because it has such an incredible root system and it has such an ability to grow in such cold soils that it is a real staple. A lot of farmers try to use wheat and that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with using wheat. A living root's better than no living root, but compared to what cereal rye or even triticale will do, it just doesn't compare, because it won't grow, in a pool of soils. It won't put near the root system down. And I mean, honestly, rye is more expensive than wheat generally, especially if you have it in your bin already, but it'll pay you dividends. For example, this picture here. So this was a customer that this field was actually tilled because it was a brand new field they took on and needed quite a bit of leveling, that kind of thing. So they did their leveling work and planted this rye in September, I think it was. This picture is March 11th. You look at that, it's kind of your typical cereal grain field in the springtime. This is April 27th. That's how much growth it put on. I'll show you another picture in the next slide to show that you wouldn't have that much growth already with something like wheat. So especially for your farmers that are running cattle as well, that's a real key for your early spring grazing, that kind of thing. Triticale, I've got a picture on the next. Barley is one we don't use a lot unless it's a really, really high alkali area where we need everything we can as far as, salinity tolerance, that kind of thing. And of course, hairy vetch, Austrian peas. This picture here, there's vetch, and I believe this is crimson clover. These are ones that we use quite a bit. We don't use as much just because we are focused a lot on our grazing, and they don't tend to give as much grazing volume. And so we tend to be more aggressive about grazing our grasses to cycle them back on. But we sure do use them in places, and especially earlier in the season. Froze up again. There we go. Okay. On this top left, here's another example of when I say we drill our covers right after we harvest. This is silage corn that was taken off early October. I think it was like the last week in September. And right away after that, within a couple of days, we drilled cereal rye. And this picture would be taken in December. And it doesn't look very impressive, right? But there again, that rye that's just little green lines an inch and a half above ground has got roots 8 inches to a foot underneath ground already. And then by next April, this is a different field, but same scenario, that's what it looks like already. And so in that scenario there, if I remember right, we actually grazed that cereal rye and then planted corn into that field again. So no till, without any tillage. So this on the bottom left is triticale if producers are looking for maximum forage. Or I hesitate to push people to be cutting and baling their cover crops too much, because you move from cover cropping to double cropping. And anytime you grow all that forage and haul it off, it's still better than doing 10 tillage passes. It'll be better for your bottom line. I think it's better for the soil, but it's not anywhere near what you can. It's kind of like having a dog with 3 legs. It'll work, it'll get there, but compared to where you're grazing and completing the system, it's going to be a lot slower. So this on the bottom right here is an interesting representation of triticale versus rye. The left is triticale, and I'm not saying triticale is bad. It's not going to put on forage quite as quick as the rye, as you can see. I don't remember the exact date of this picture, but it's actually going to give you a longer forage window. So for customers or farmers that are looking to graze longer or have a later planting, something like that, triticale is better, whereas rye is better for anything where you need it as early as possible. Spring seeded stuff, this is mainly going to apply to farmers. This isn't going to apply so much to farmers that are growing cash crops. So anyone that's growing corn or soybeans or what else, pinto beans or sunflower, whatever, they're generally going to be planting in the spring or late spring even. And so this isn't going to apply. But for any guys that are more focused on cattle production and growing forage, we do a lot of early spring stuff like this, oats, peas, barley, spring triticale, frosty Bracine clover is one we really like as well. one place we use it, if you look in this picture in these lines, um, this is actually new seeding alfalfa with oats as a nurse crop. So you can see the alfalfa coming up there. And so that's one place. Um, we use it quite a bit if we spring plant alfalfa, and that works really well. This picture on the top right is actually that same field later on. It's new seeding alfalfa and frosty clover, and we cut the oats and then had an alfalfa field. So one thing I'll say there again, when we talk about living roots, this is one that a lot of old timers especially are guilty of feeling like, well, you can't plant oats till whatever, till there's not frost potential, whatever. And I'm not going to say you could never have them frosted out. Like, I don't want to, I try not to speak in that black and white. Nothing's black and white, but I can tell you that we've had times where the weather is favorable, the conditions are favorable to plant this kind of thing in early February, and we go out and drill with a no-till drill, plant into moisture, and then walk away, and you don't see a thing from it until about the same time you'd be planting, but it's already germinating when it's still too wet to get out in your field at times. So what I'm saying is, maybe that's an extreme example, but this is the kind of thing that you'll be paid dividends by being prepared to plant early. So again, talking early to midsummer stuff, this won't necessarily apply to guys that, I mean, obviously most guys cash crops are in the field growing during this time. What it can apply to is like in this this bottom left picture here. This is an example of a field that had some kind of bad soil and that kind of thing, and we weren't really wanting to. It was the point in the rotation where we would have planted corn, and we weren't ready to do that, and we did need some pasture because at this time these cattle didn't have a place to go in the high country for the summer. And so we planted a diverse mix here. So this is sorghum Sudan. I mean, almost everything in this list on the left. Teff grass, Hubam clover. This would be pearl millet, soybeans, cowpeas, all that kind of thing. And we planted this about 5th of June, something like that, and let it grow up until, mid-July, and then grazed the cows on it, grazed across it, sectional grazing all the way across it, and pulled it off and let it regrow and did that again. So in this scenario, we pulled that field out of our normal rotation and essentially used this cover crop as a way to feed cattle and also put a ton of nutrients back in the field, because we took all of that. I mean, it got 8 foot tall in some places, and we took all of that and processed it through our cattle, took organic matter that's kind of available to the soil and made it that much more usable by the soil microbes, and fed our cattle. And then in that scenario, which you could either graze it twice, you could actually let your second growth regrow and stockpile it for winter. In this scenario, we actually, top picture is the same field. We cut the second cutting for hay. This would have been in October. We cut it for hay and baled it, and then drilled wheat into that field, planted wheat. So just varies on your scenario, but this is the kind of thing that's a really good scenario for either producers that are trying to grow a maximum amount of forage. These summer cover crops can really grow a lot of forage, or for anyone that's trying to, fix a problem area or problem soils that they don't necessarily feel like they want to put their high value crops on, that are more lucrative, but also a lot more expensive. Also in any kind of a droughtish area where you're worried about, I mean, you do have to be concerned about nitrates and some of this kind of thing in drought times, but you also, you can grow a lot more sorghum Sudan based cover crops on very little rain compared to trying to grow a corn crop that'll flat out fail. So then this is where it gets really fun for sure. So like I said, we grow quite a bit of small grains. We used to grow quite a bit more wheat. We're transitioning now to growing more cereal rye for seed, for our seed business, triticale for seed, oats for seed, those kind of things. But they all fall in. They're all a little different timing as far as combining, but they fall in fairly similar. So this is one of those just low hanging fruit where farmers combine their wheat fields in July. This would have been combined in mid-July, and then what? It just sits there. It sits there until they decide to go out and do 8 or 10 tillage passes to plant again, whatever they're planting. If you're lucky, if they're really being aggressive, they'll plant alfalfa if that's next in their rotation, and so it doesn't set too long. Most of the time, it sets sometimes all the way until next spring. So in this scenario, rather than doing all that, letting it set, letting it dry out, losing all our soil moisture, doing 8 or 10 tillage passes, we went in there again within 3 days after we harvest. And most of the time, it's within the same day we can actually get our cover crop planted. We try to. Uh, Anyways, within 3 days, we go in and plant this cover crop. And this right here is a 15, I don't even remember, 15, 18 way species mix here. So it's everything pretty well in this bottom list is in this mix right here. And so we plant that. I mean, this would have been planted basically 1st of August, or well, I don't remember exactly. I think this was cereal rye we combined, so it would have been planted more like second week in July, actually. So, anyways, right after we harvest and grow it through the summer. And then these are cows here grazing the sunflowers and the cover crop. What we do a lot of actually that works really, really well is when we come off of the high country or whatever your summer pasture is, we come down to these kind of mixes with our cow and calf pairs and run them on that. And once they have a little bit of time to get, sorted around, reacclimated, we have everything gathered. We wean our calves across a double strand of poly wire with a really hot charger. It works really, really well. People think it's crazy, but it works. So we fence line wean our calves, and then we pull our cows and go to other lower quality forages that are more appropriate for a second trimester cow, like whether it's corn residue at that point or what. And then we run our calves on those kind of mixes all the way through generally January. So we're putting them on those kind of mixes and sectional grazing them rather than running them in a feedlot. And so we don't get quite the gains we do out of a feedlot, but we also have no doctoring. I'm not saying we won't ever doctor something, but in the last 3 years, we've doctored maybe one calf. We just have very little health issues. The calves tend to put on a little bit more frame and growth, like less muscle gain, but more growth, so that when they do go into a feedlot, they're ready to take off. So we're starting to get more of a following for those calves with cattle buyers because they know what they'll do. So that's where we take this void in most people's farming system. We're still growing our cash crops. It's not that we quit growing wheat or anything like that. We're still growing that cash crop, but then we get after it right as soon as we harvest. We plant this, and we utilize it that much more. And so this is our substitute for having concrete bunks and pens and squeeze chutes because you're doctoring every day and feed mixer wagons and tractors and skid loaders running all winter. This is what we do instead. You drive your pickup to the field and move your cattle. So here's some more pictures of it. This top left, this was planted after wheat harvest, and this would have been planted in the first week of August. You can see that that's a radish there, a tillage radish and a turnip, and there's all kinds of diversity in there. So this picture would have been taken middle of November, so here in a couple weeks, but last 2 years ago, I believe. So another picture, this would have been kind of the same scenario. You can see the oats in the background there and everything. And then this bottom left, I mean, this is an example of this would have been in late December. These cattle were grazing it, and it doesn't necessarily look like it's very nutritional at that point, but I guarantee if you dug down underneath all that mat, these turnips and radishes and collards are still green under there. And those cattle, plus the sunflowers, they pick those sunflower heads and eat them. And those cattle weren't getting any supplementation and weren't needing it at that point. So this is the kind of thing that there again, not only are you growing all this forage, you're putting it back into your soil, but also if we design it right, it's the type of thing where, especially with mother cows, you wouldn't be supplementing on that. If you were, you'd be just squirting money out the back end of the cows instead of utilizing it. So it's pretty impressive what you can do there. One thing I'll say is people get pretty excited about turnips and radishes, like this. I mean, turnips and radishes are great. We use them in our summer mixes. Them by themselves is not the answer. So if sometimes producers will get all pumped up and want to just, we want to plant turnips and radishes. Some of them call them beets if they really want to get to you, And the reality is that planting just those brassicas by themselves, unless you have a lot of wheat stubble or a lot of residue, can actually take you backwards in a way because they are such a low carbon to nitrogen ratio. They'll actually essentially they cause a feeding frenzy of the microbes, and you'll end up with bare soil in the spring that they've just, it's not a good scenario. So you want to plant them in a mix. I tell people that over and over that turnips and radishes are great. They look the most flashy, but there's a lot of other things in here that are doing really great things that you want to have in. Buckwheat is one that I talked a bunch about, but we use it religiously, especially anytime we're going into alfalfa, because it's really good at taking phosphorus from deep down in the soil, pulling it up and making it more available to other plants. Flax is another one that does that. The sunflowers, they're not just for looks, although it is pretty to look at. They're great for breaking compaction and scavenging nutrients and that kind of thing. So everything in here serves a different purpose. So don't let people get too stuck on one thing. The other thing is sometimes, I mean, if we just planted a straight grass in here, yes, we could probably grow more forage than we are here. But you're growing a straight grass that will need more supplementation in the wintertime if it gets grazed into January. It'll need more nutrients from the outside, like chemical fertilizer, to make it grow because it doesn't have that synergy. We probably actually have more weed issues, is what we found. We have less weed issues with a diverse cover crop like this than we ever do with the monoculture. So just talking, I know that a lot of you are working with producers that are specifically really involved in cattle. So just talk a little bit more about that. One thing I want to point out that, and I know it's different areas, how big your operations are and everything, but it's not that different. And one of the biggest keys for us with making the cattle work with farming is this right here. This man's got a polywire reel right here, and we sectional graze. We don't always move our cattle every day in the wintertime. Sometimes we don't in certain scenarios if the ground's really frozen, but 90% of the time we move our cattle every single day. And I can tell you, I've worked with producers that say it's too much trouble, and there's one older gentleman I can think of in particular that he said it's just too much trouble to move them every day. But then during calving season, I watch him go out and hike across the cornstalk field, tripping with bad knees, trying to find his cows and calves, see who's calved and if everything's okay. And he could have spent that time reeling up his fence wire and not had to go tripping all over. He would have just walked one line and all his cows would be there. So we do it largely for just traffic control. So especially with our furrow irrigation, we're able to keep cattle from walking at an angle across rows, that kind of things, where the water doesn't run. With center pivot or dry land or something, that's not quite as critical, but still, anytime there's a compacted trail and you go over it with your corn planter and your corn seed doesn't go 2.5 inches deep for that one trail that goes across your field, 18 inches wide for a quarter mile long, that's lost yield. And so it's very simple to do this. Also, the other thing that's big is I watch a lot of guys with permanent fenced pastures or fields, and it's wonderful. But the trouble is, a lot of those guys, they might have 10 acres of creek bottom along the one end, which there again, that's a great asset. I'm in the cow business, I get it. But when your cows are going out onto your field, on your whatever it is, whatever your field is, they graze all day, and then they walk back to that field, and what do? They spend the whole night chewing cud and depositing manure in your creek bottom. So they are actually hauling nutrients off your field and putting them in the creek bottom. Now, it's great for the creek bottom, but it can be too much as well. So we use this as well to control where they bed down. We open up a wider area where we want them to bed down and narrower where we don't want them, so they're less comfortable there. We can actually control where they deposit their manure. It's kind of like prescription nutrient application, but we just do our own prescriptions there. So another thing I want to talk about briefly is, so this middle bottom picture here, that's not cover crop. That would be, if you remember where I had the picture of us drilling into corn residue, this would be that same field. And so we do graze we graze all our corn residue. We don't bale off our stalks. We don't burn corn stalks. We run them through a cow and we let them break down. So, and this is that same field, that same winter where we drilled cereal rye in, and then that would have been in December, and then came back in January while the ground was frozen. The cereal rye seed is underneath there. Graze our cows, sectional graze. And we mostly just graze the husks and the corn and clean up some of the leaves and leave the rest. There again, the more you push them on corn stalks, the more you have to supplement, that kind of thing. But so we clean up that and move them across their field, graze them there. Now next spring, go to the top left. Now your cereal rye is germinated. Now you go back and you graze your cows on the same field again, 1 to 2 times, depending on what if you're planting corn, whatever you're planting, whatever works with your planting window. Graze it again, and then plant corn or whatever. I keep saying corn because that's what this system is, but not a requirement. It could be a sorghum sudan cover crop like we talked about. But the point is that in this situation, most farmers would have their corn, they combine in December, combine that, and then kind of grumble about the corn stalks because you either got to let some cow guy come in and trash out the field and makes a mess, cows get out, whatever, or you go in and bale them off, and then corn stalks are kind of worth just about enough to pay for your tractor time, and nobody likes baling them, or you leave them and till them in, and it's hard to get them tilled in adequately for irrigation, or you burn them, and the neighbors are grouchy because nobody likes burning because our valley's getting encroached upon by people who are not interested in that. So either way, they're grouchy about their corn stalks, and they go and do what, 6, 8, sometimes 10 tillage passes in the spring to make this field be ready to plant corn. Then they plant their corn. Versus in this scenario, you get, let's just say, you get a month of grazing for your cattle off of the corn residue, and then another 3 weeks to a month off of it for your rye, and then plant your corn. So it's just, I'm not saying it's perfect. There's challenges like anything. I tell people that regenerative ag and cover crops and no-till is less labor intensive from a tractor cab. We don't spend near the time in tractors. We don't run our, we're farming close to 900 acres, and our biggest tractors are 180 horsepower and two-wheel drive. So we're not running massive tractors. We don't have that, but it's much more intensive in your head. It's more planning out. There's tighter windows. It's we've got to be aggressive when it's time to go. We're going. So I'm not saying it's without issues. We've had some wet winters that have made it more challenging, but so far we've been amazed how by following the system, it comes around. It comes back to you. So this bottom left picture and some of these on the right, I can't see around my deal here, but oops, would be more cover crops grown after wheat. And so those would be those calves that we have weaned there, and we're running them on those cover crops. That would be from a field day we did in November. So another thing people get stuck on is how to get water to your cattle. Then, well, you can't. It's pretty cool to have your automatic water in the one corner of your field, and so whenever you get your combine, get it all combined, it's corn residue or whatever, you turn your cows out, and that whole corner of the field is just a spider web of trails going to the water, but you didn't have to haul water. Well, the trouble is most guys are going there to check on their cows once every day anyways. So this is the kind of rigs that we run. Now I know it depends on how many cows, you might need a bigger or smaller rig, but this 3/4 ton old $3,000 farm truck with 2 water tanks on the back, I can haul 600 gallons of water. I can put my tanks on the back. It's easy to move them along the top of the field. So whenever sometimes it depends. A lot of times I'll make an alleyway along the bottom to where the cattle walk to the water, and you can control traffic. Sometimes I'll actually move the tank along as they go. But that whole rig right there, I'm going there every day. And then that little black and white border collie there is my system for managing cattle versus feed wagons and bunks and all the special hay feeding trucks and semis to haul hay. This is our system right here. So and then lastly, real quick, I think, let's see where we're at on time here. About right. So one thing I want to say is a lot of times people there again will get really excited about all this cover crops and turnips and radishes and everything. Don't ever be guilty of actually encouraging farmers to rotate out of perennials to plant cover crops to help their soil, because the only thing we are doing with cover crops is trying to grow cash crops and also be as close to mimicking nature in a perennial as possible. That's literally what we're trying to do, is use our annual cover crops to follow those soil health principles the way a perennial would. So like this pasture right here is a great example of soil health. I mean, there's 2 or 3 different varieties of grasses. There's alfalfa, there's clovers, there's plantain, chicory, some other weeds that we'll call forbs because they're fulfilling something, even though I'm not always sure what they are. This is grazed a couple times a year and it's allowed to rest. This is doing everything for the soil that any cover crop can. Now, annual cover crops can be a great way to prep soil for a perennial like this. And there's certain scenarios where you might rotate out of this perennial because it's going to go into more cash crops. And so you plant cover crops or whatever. That's all fine, but just don't be guilty of feeling like you need to plant these impressive little cover crops, because this right here is nature's cover crop and there's nothing wrong with it in the world. So um, we'll just kind of finish up here. So real quick, I just want to talk a little bit about, so like I said, we're farmers. We're primarily farmers. We are full-time farmers. But when we were getting started with all this, we found that here in the Grand Valley where we're at, there were no resources anywhere. Very little in Colorado, honestly, for guys wanting to do this. We started out and we still work with green cover seed out of Nebraska quite a bit, because I mean, that was where we could get answers. And these no-till drills here, the first no-till drill we ever bought was an Esch drill. They used to be green, but it was an Esch drill, and they're made in Pennsylvania. And this has been the biggest key to our system right here, is these Esch no-till drills. And so, but there again, we found that for anybody who wasn't as excited about making something happen as we were, that lack of resources just ended up meaning it just didn't happen. And so we started Lifetime Ag, kind of grown it from just getting in a pallet of seed here and there for others to more of a business now. And so we are a dealer for these Esch no-till drills, and we also rent them out as well. So we rent these out all over western Colorado, eastern Utah, northern New Mexico. We've got into Wyoming a few times even. So I want to talk briefly about these. I know that there's a lot of conservation districts on here. So when I say we rent these out, this is a 12-foot drill that turns sideways and locks in the sideways position to go down the road. And this drill in this position right here could be hooked up to by a 3/4 ton pickup right now and hauled 70 miles an hour down the highway. And so we wouldn't be able to rent out no-till drills like we do if it weren't for these, because it's just, I'm sure some of you have been through it. You've got a drill that's too wide to run down the road, but too narrow for farmers to actually want to use. And you got to lift it onto a trailer. Then you got random people lifting your drill and hanging it from loader buckets. And it's just not a good scenario. These have taillights on them. Here it is, folded out. These are a real scenario. These are a real game changer for us. And I'd say if there's any one way I can think of to start more conversations around soil health and cause more farmers to try something different, it's having this kind of a tool available for rent. It doesn't need to be for free, but whatever. But having this kind of a tool that farmers can try and find that it works. And a lot of times they'll start out with things like overseed and perennials, which is great. We do a ton of that as well. And pretty soon they'll start to get this bug in the back of their mind, like, well, we can plant all this stuff without doing tillage. Why are we doing tillage to plant our other crops? Why are we having to, plow our field to go plant wheat after corn, that kind of thing? Well, why? Well, there's no reason to. So another thing we really like about these is they have foam metering pads, so we can run diverse seed mixes through. I mean, we plant those 15-way mixes. We dump that whole mix in this bin on the drill and go to plant, and they run them through. So anyways, I don't want to do a big advertisement, but I do think these are a drill that are really worth looking at. And then we supply all kinds of cover crop seed, forage seeds, perennial. I can do native grass mixes, all that kind of thing. So we've tried to, specifically in our valley, but elsewhere too, we're trying to, our motto is, we're farmers helping farmers, and we're trying to provide real farmer knowledge as far as what we have found that's worked. This is what's worked, or this did not work for us, I wouldn't try that, to farmers, and then help them have the resources to get what they need. We've also done a little bit of consulting here and there. It's not something we're really focused on, but we've done some consulting work as well, just to help farmers get started in regenerative ag. So there's my contact information, my email, website, all that kind of thing, if you're interested. We do also do some field days. We don't have a firm date yet, but we're planning to do one this fall. We normally do one or two a year. So feel free to go and get on our website and go to our email list there as well if you're interested in knowing about that. And we sure welcome anyone from the community or anywhere, however far you want to drive. So yeah, if you have any other questions, I think John's going to leave some time for questions later on. So yeah, that's all I got, John.
Great. Thank you, Philip. That was a lot of information. Really good information. Folks, if you want to throw some questions in the chat box or turn on your microphones. We're glad to take questions. I think it's one point that I got out of all that was like the most really important thing that I saw there was maybe that diversity feeds the soil life, and it also feeds your cattle really well. They seem like they are very happy and healthy cattle in those pictures. And it's neat to see or to hear you say, the importance of having both of these things sort of together, the cover cropping and the livestock in there. Seems like those two practices are kind of hand in glove to me.
You're right, and really and truly, the more we've gotten into it, we found that it's easy to focus too hard on needing to have pasture, needing to have cover crop, whatever. But if we focus on the soil, we find that the rest comes together.
I think that's really great advice. We got any questions? Boy, that was really good information. Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about the nurse crop where you had the oats and the alfalfa together. I know we have some interest from folks to establish forage crops. So you plant those at the same time, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, so it just varies on the time of year. So, I mean, I think most people know the ideal time to plant something like alfalfa or grass or perennials is generally in the fall. I mean, just whether you're overseeding or you're planting new, the far and away the better time is to plant. Like, depends on your area, but for us, late August, early September, just 9 times out of 10, that's the better scenario. In that case, I don't generally do a nurse crop. But if you're planting in the spring, which there's scenarios where that's what works best for a producer, then I like to use a nurse crop. And yeah, we run it through the drill at the same time. We plant whether it's oats or triticale, generally oats with it, and we do like a part rate. So rather than doing a full rate of maybe 120 pounds of oats, we do like 60 pounds roughly is generally what I do, depending on the scenario. And the idea is it does a couple things. One is it's going to come up quicker than your alfalfa, and so it'll provide some protection right off. Now that's less of an issue in our system with no-till because we already have residue there providing some protection, but it's still critical that we get that up before the alfalfa so that it can provide some protection to it. It also is a scenario where, and in this whole system, you can either fight weeds through chemicals or you can fight weeds through breaking their cycle. And so it's just simple as rather than fighting what you don't want to have growing, plant what you do want and let it do its work. So in that scenario, we're planting something like oats with it so that it can come up in canopy even when the alfalfa is slow and get ahead of our weed pressure, and as well as just simply make it more cost effective because when you plant a perennial in the spring, you're not going to get a lot of dollar value out of it until the next year. So having something like that sure helps. We do the same thing later on in the summer. Most guys don't plant alfalfa except for either spring or fall. We found that being that we're planting with residue and we have that protection, we planted alfalfa in June before, as crazy as it sounds, then we use more like sorghum or millet, that kind of thing, do the same thing, a light rate, and make a couple cuttings off of it and let the alfalfa continue to grow, and it works great.
great. That's really good information too. Another thing, I saw you had gourds in your seed mix. Do your cows eat gourds?
They believe it or not, they do. The gourds not as much. Generally, it's actually a mix with gourds and other squash and melons and that kind of thing. But as long as they catch it before they turn hard, which generally we're planting late enough that they're not actually turning to a hard shell, but they love them. I mean, it's another thing that you'd think of the whole squash plant seems like kind of a waste other than for soil health, but they find those and I've watched them many times happily chewing on a gourd or a squash or zucchini, a pumpkin, a melon. They love them.
You were talking about weeds a little bit there. I know some of these crops have allelopathic qualities, and that's probably an important thing to bring up. I think the cereal rye does, correct?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Correct.
So it's when you get a good crop of that established, you're helping to push those weeds, stop that weed pressure, break the cycle,
Correct.
maybe.
Correct. And that's another one I forgot to bring up, but that's why cereal rye is such a staple in the cover crop regenerative world, and in our world for sure, is not only the aggressive way it comes in the spring, but also the allelopathic effects it has, that it essentially releases. I don't know if you call it a toxin, but let's call it a toxin to other plants that can keep things from germinating as quickly. It doesn't necessarily stop them from germinating, but it keeps them from germinating as quickly. So along with that, we're conscious about, if we are planting alfalfa in the summer, we don't do we don't plant rye beforehand, because we have had issues where it can actually keep our alfalfa from germinating correctly. We've had failures there. Keep in mind, a failure with no-till isn't as much of a failure, because we didn't spend 100, 200, $300 an acre on tillage. We spent $25 an acre planting with our drill and tractor, and that's including our time. So anyways, yes, short answer. So we're conscious of that, and we also use it to our advantage. So especially like planting corn or soybeans, we don't plant soybeans, but for other people, planting those kind of things into rye, it actually has a big advantage as far as helping you to get ahead of that weed control. So when you combine that much growth with the allelopathic effect, combined with whenever you terminate that cover crop and plant into it, and you have that weed barrier from it laying down on the ground, it sure helps.
Do you do a lot of like roller crimping termination, or do you work with folks that are doing that?
Right. We haven't a lot. I have some customers that do some. The main reason we haven't, in fact, we'd like to do more of it. There again, we are focused on cattle grazing, and so when you do graze that, it messes a lot with how everything matures, and it makes it tiller out more. It makes it a lot harder to actually get a termination with roller crimping. So we do roll it. We actually, so one thing I should talk about, I saw somebody popped up with a question about furrow irrigation. We have special creasers we've designed that handle our furrowing, cutting furrows through creases, and they have rollers on them. So oftentimes we will roll it. It'll lay it down and create more of a weed barrier, but we do have to terminate otherwise chemically to actually get it killed because of that grazing. Now, if we're in a scenario where we're not grazing at all, we would be more likely to do roller crimping. But in our scenario, the grazing is such a key for us.
Yeah. Is that creaser you guys use, is that of your own design, or
Yeah, let me look and see what the question was. Did I do that right? Yeah.
is there any unique challenges you encountered with furrow irrigation? We have a
Right.
difficult time getting water through the field without clean furrows.
Right. Yes, that was one of the biggest challenges we had, and we weren't sure. A lot of people told us it wouldn't work, and we weren't sure it would work for a long time. What you have is it's one of those things that, yeah, I don't miss those days, because a typical shank style creaser with residue is just a wreck. It balls up, you haul those balls down the field, or they fall off the sides, and then you've got these nasty balls that you hit with equipment later on. It's Or you just don't, and you can't get water through the field. So what we found over time, and we work with a company out of Missouri that they designed. They're called vine cutters. I wish I had a picture of it, but let's see here. Could I actually? Well, that's all right. So basically, what they are is they're two straight coulters that are at an angle to each other that go in the furrow for each furrow of our creaser, and they slice through that residue rather than cutting and dragging like a shovel does. And so they slice through it and they throw it up out. We have two different kinds, one that's a straight and one that's a more concave. If you envision like a disc harrow, those type of coulters, two of them faced away from each other at an angle, where it slices and throws that out. And that was, before that, we weren't sure if regenerative ag would work in a no-till system. And that's the number one thing that holds other farmers up, is their mindset is that it won't work. But we have that. So basically we found the unit, the vine cutter unit, and we built our own creasers to go around them. And so we've got, I don't know, there's probably 15 different guys in our valley now running those kind of creasers that have had really good luck with them. And so we've actually sold all our other creasers, and we run that and everything from our hay fields to 230 bushel corn residue. And there again, whoever that was asked, I mean, feel free to call me or email me or something. I can show you pictures and help you out, figure out better, because it's been a real key. That's one of the things we offer as well. And so I'd sure be glad to help you figure out how to work through that.
Well, that's great. Thank you. We're getting near the top of the hour here, and our Zoom tends to cut off right after noon. So before we lose everybody, let's everybody give a digital round of applause for Philip. Thank you very much, sir, for coming in today and talking to us. We appreciate it. These will be recorded and put on our YouTube channel. So if you folks want to pop over there and watch this again, or if you need Philip's information, let us know and we can send that out as well. And thanks again, Philip.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.